Welcome to Rosemary, the map written into two travelers walk at the edge of a morning that had not yet decided its own color. It was called Girl Still Missing Summer. The other boy held his breath. They are not children, not yet grown, just people small enough to fit inside one another's worry. Between them lay a single crumpled map, no rivers, no road, only the faint ring of yesterday's dew. They had come to see the famous forest that no postcard could hold, the forest older than the world forest. The first pine nodded and whispered, "If you enter, leave your finish behind." They laughed, thinking it poetry, and stepped over the border of shade. The path that forgot itself inside light fell in slow curtains, green as creek, water over copper pines. The trail grew, then loosened. The wind like yarn pulled back by a playback cat. Birds song repeated one syllable here, but the echo arrived before the original sound. So direction unrevealed. Girl still missing summer tried to mark trees with a pocket knife. The bark held before the blade left sealing like lips after a secret. Boy hold his dropped breadcrumb stones, hearts cried each fragment away before it touched moss. Time thinned. They walked anyway. The old man who walked out of smoke when the sky could no longer be seen. An old man appeared, leaning on a staff of peeled aspen. His beard held entire seasons, pollen, forest, a feather, a spike. He did not ask how to traveler lost the path. He asked how the path lost them. They had no answer polite enough, so they offered him the last of their water. He drank, returned the flask, and said, "The forest escapes people every day. Tonight I will walk you out, but first the forest must finish escaping." The ground seemed to agree, softening under his heels like bread dough. The night of unnaming, they camped where darkness pooled deepest. The old man built a fire, not of wood, but of questions, each flame. Who were you before you arrived? One by one their name vanished. Girl still missing summer became she who walked with damp feet. Boy held his breath became he who listened to smoke. With every lost name, the forest grew kinder, branches lifting like arms after a long work day, all scarred, clearing not who but you, soft welcoming. They slept without sleeping. The sky above them practiced sunrise in private. The river beneath the river at first light. Old man led them to a sound of water they could not see. He tapped the ground, soil echoed hollow. Under your shoes runs the river that taught our other rivers how to be bent. He pried up a flat stone the size of dinner plate. Underneath, black water slid past, crying leaves upside down like teeny boats of starlight. Step in, he said. The forest lets go of those who let go of land. They stepped. The water was warm as blood, shallow as confidence. It cried them, not downstream but inward, until each tree on their bank reflected in the liquid like memories facing each other. They walked beneath themselves while remaining above themselves. The old man walked beside them on solid ground, humming. The clearing that had already left midday revealed a meadow shaped like a yawn, wide round, surprised. Wildflowers grew in every color night had ever invented. Indigo of half past 3, vivid of almost dawn, blush of I was only joking. In the center stood a single stamp, smooth as a tabletop. On it lay two objects, a feather the color of absence and a pebble the shape of almost. The old man gestured, take one proof, leave the rest. She chose the feather, he chose the pebble. Behind them, the clearing side folded inward like a paper fan and slipped between dimensions gone before goodbye. They understood. Some places finish with you before you finish with them. The ridge of second warning. They climbed now, boards creeping, lungs, learning altitude. The old man moved without effort, stopped, ticking like a metronome, keeping time for 3 separate heartbeats. At the ridge top, the wide open familiar valleys, distant road, a curl of smoke from a farmhouse that had always been there but never noticed. The forest below looked like ordinary woods, no shimmer, no maze, no mow. It had finished escaping them. It now rested satisfied. They turned to thank the guide. He was already her smoke, her stories milling through board of seasons, keep forgetting his sad voice, thinning paths return to people who forget to force them. Men took The rest of his syllables, they floated off like milkweed seeds. The descent into ordinary. They walked down the outside of the ridge, no river beneath their feet, no questions burning. Names beat back slowly like water into a dry well, but lighter. She who walks with damp feet became girl who knows summer return. He who listens to smoke became boy who breathes with ease. They reached a dirt road, then a paved road, then a cafe with neon coffee cup flickering open. Inside, people talked of weather, sport, prices of gas, nothing of escaping forest. They smiled, ordered 2 hot chocolates, and listened to the steam hiss as sound almost like an old man humming. The proof at home. Years later, in separate cities, they each keep the souvenir on a beside table. A feather that, when held to the air, whisper rich, rich, rich. A people that, when tapped, answer with a hollow river echo. On night when sleep is stubborn, they hold the proof breath in 4 beats and feel again the warm underground river, the meadows folding, the guide half smoke, sleep rise, then not as escape but as homecoming. The listener turn. Now you under your blanket become the third traveler. Feel the ridge form along the curve of your spine. Feel the underground river pool in the hollow of your throat. Feel the old man's staff tap once at the base of your skin. Gentle permissions to let the day escape you. With every exhale, the forest finishes its living. With every inhale, the ordinary returns lighter, nameless kind. When your breathing matches the tap of the invisible staff, the story steps out of you, satisfied, and only sleep remains, a clearing that will never slip away.